In 1931, William Stanier was manager of Swindon Works and Collett's right-hand man. With only 4 years between them, it was highly unlikely that he would ever achieve his ambition of becoming CME of the Great Western Railway. So Stanier accepted an offer to become the chief mechanical engineer of the London, Midland and Scottish Railway, a post he took up at the beginning of 1932. Soon after his arrival, it was apparent there was an urgent need for big, powerful locomotives, and Stanier presented his case for an express passenger locomotive capable of hauling 500 tons the 401 miles between Euston and Glasgow, a run which would include the steep banks at Shap and Beatock. The LNER had already stolen a march over the LMS for the lucrative Scottish traffic with the introduction of their A1 Pacifics in 1927. The LMS were keen to fight back, and it took Stanier only 18 months to produce the first of his powerful Pacifics. Not surprisingly, Stanier was greatly influenced by his Great Western experience, and the new design incorporated many features of Swindon practice, particularly derived from the King-class locomotive. The first two Pacifics, the prototypes, emerged in 1933. Then followed 2 years of development work, mainly to sort out problems with steaming. Then came the production run, a batch of 10 built in 1935. And this was the first of them, number 6203, Princess Margaret Rose. Meanwhile, the LNER had surprised the world with their new streamlined Pacifics, the Class A4s. The LMS, they replied by announcing the introduction of a streamlined service to Scotland to start in 1937. And these would be powered by development of the Princesses, and these were to be Stanier's magnificent Coronation Pacifics. The first 10 Coronations were outshot with distinctive streamlined casings. In all, 24 streamliners were built and 14 conventional Pacifics between the years 1937 and 1948. In this programme, we'll look at a number of aspects of the development of Staniers Pacifics, looking at film taken in the 1930s, through nationalisation, the British Railway story, and then the incredible developments in preservation. So, sit back and enjoy with us the Staniers Pacific story.
All 51 Staniers Pacifics were built at Crewe. These are the main frames of the 5th production Princess, number 6207, Princess Arthur of Connaught. The 4 massive cylinders were each 16¼ inches in diameter with a 28-inch stroke. The inside cylinders were set forward and drove the front axle, while the outside cylinders drove the centre driving axle. The assembled frame is taken to the main erecting shop by an ex-London and North Western 060. Unlike the prototypes, the production Pacifics were fitted with an external motion bracket. The wide bell pair firebox had a sloping throat plate. A feature of the Princess's design was the very long boiler. The great area was 45 square feet. Following some steaming problems with the 2 prototypes, the boiler was redesigned with a larger 32-element superheater and a combustion chamber in the firebox. The boiler is then lifted into position for the fitting of the boiler tubes. At this stage, the main cab controls are fitted. Finally, the boiler pressure is tested. The working pressure was set at 250 pounds per square inch. The completed firebox and boiler assembly is then moved to the main erecting shop. In a scene which would give today's health and safety inspectors a heart attack, the boiler and firebox are fitted with asbestos cladding. By now, the long smoke box has also been joined to the boiler assembly. Crew's overhead cranes move the boiler down the works to be fitted onto its frames. The simple cab had large double side windows and carried the locomotive's sans serif running number. Next, the single chimney is fitted. The main driving wheels are 6 foot 6 inches in diameter. The loco is nearing completion and is now ready to receive its wheels. This delicate operation required much skill from the works staff. Then the connecting rods and motion are fitted. The production princesses benefited from shorter slide bars. Instead of straight-sided tenders designed for the prototypes, the production Pacifics were matched with curved top tenders which carried 9 tons of coal and 4,000 gallons of water. All the 10 production princesses were out-shopped between July and October 1935, numbered from 6203 to 6212. The livery was Crimson Lake, edged in black with a yellow line. Note the absence of cab steps because of the body overhang on curves. Access was by means of the tender-mounted steps. The power classification was 7P, and the locomotives were rated at a tractive effort of 40,300 pounds. In full working order, a Princess locomotive and tender weighed in at 158.5 tons. This would increase by a further 2 tons when the tenders were replaced with a specially uprated 10-ton capacity tender the following year. The next sequence features one of the prototypes soon after entering traffic in 1933. Number 6201, Princess Elizabeth, departs Euston. Note the domeless boiler and the original straight-sided tender. It soon became apparent that the practice of using low degrees superheat, which Stanier had adopted from the Great Western, turned out to be unsuitable for LMS conditions, where indifferent qualities of coal could seriously affect performance. Modifications were subsequently made to try and cure the problem. The cost of building the Princesses was £12,657 for 6200 and £11,675 for 6201. By the time of the production batch, this figure had fallen to £9,690. Two test runs deserve mention. Firstly, 6203 achieved 102.5 miles per hour just south of Leighton Buzzard on the 3rd of May 1936. This is the fastest speed recorded by a Princess. Then, 6 months later, on the 16th and 17th of November 1936, 6201 worked a return non-stop test run between Euston and Glasgow. The northbound run took 5 hours 53 minutes, and the southbound took 5 hours 44 minutes. The results of the trial led directly to the introduction of the Coronation Scot service. At the same time as the first two Princess Royals were being constructed, work began on the turbine-driven experimental locomotive 6202. These fascinating, if somewhat poor quality views show the locomotive just after completion in June 1935 at Euston. Note the long casing running down the left-hand side of the locomotive. This housed the turbine steam valves and operating gear for the forward turbine. A rather pleased-looking Stanier on the left shows off his latest toy to LMS chairman Lord Stamp. The loco was fitted with a double chimney and the gearing was completely enclosed in an oil bath. On the right-hand side of the loco, a smaller casing enclosed the reverse turbine. This could only be engaged when the loco was in reverse and was far less powerful than the forward turbine, which normally produced 2,600 horsepower. The loco covered 444,000 miles prior to requiring a new turbine. This was prohibitively expensive, and in early 1952, work began to rebuild it as a conventional Pacific. Our final shot of this fascinating design is at Harrow, where 17 years later, on the 8th of October 1952, the rebuilt loco was written off in the disastrous Harrow crash. Prior to building the last batch of Pacifics, streamlining tests were carried out in the wind tunnel at the LMS's Derby Research Centre. A number of experiments with a 1/24th scale model were conducted before deciding on the final form the casing should take. Construction of the first 5 locomotives began at Crewe in 1937. To fit the streamlined casing, the top of the firebox was chamfered. The boiler was shortened in length and increased in diameter to match a larger Belpaire firebox with a combustion chamber. The front bogie retained the 7-foot 6-inch wheelbase, but the wheel diameter was reduced from 39 to 36 inches. The smoke box, boiler and cylinders were enveloped in a curved front casing. The outside cylinders were moved forward to the more usual position between the bogie wheels. The livery was a striking Caledonian blue, relieved by 4 silver stripes. Gear drive was by outside Walschaerts gear, with rocking beam to drive the inside valves. The cab had an air-smoothing wedged front. The driving wheels were increased from 6 foot 9 inches diameter to 7 foot 3 inches. Even Coronation's lights received a distinctive Art Deco styling. William Stanier had every right to be proud of his latest creation. The new locomotives were planned to work the 6.5-hour Coronation Scot service between Euston and Glasgow, complete with matching coaches. Not once to miss a publicity stunt, the LMS arranged this lineup of motive power. On the left is the 1838-built 042 Lion, which later starred in the Titfield Thunderbolt. In the centre is King George V class, number 25348, Coronation. Continuing to milk the publicity angle, 6 days before the new service was to start, on the 5th of July 1937, the press were invited on board a special from Euston to Crewe and return. It was an open secret that something out of the ordinary was going to happen. For nearly 2 years, the LNER had held court with regard to speed, and the previous year an A4 had achieved 113 miles per hour. This record was obviously the target. The northbound run was covered by cameramen chasing the train in aeroplanes. Coronation passes the Ovaltine building at King's Langley at a healthy 82 miles per hour. The train was made up of 8 streamlined coaches with a gross weight of 270 tons, and the official timings for the run were as per the new Coronation Scott point-to-point timings. It was also made clear that nothing unusual would happen until the train reached Stafford. As the train sped north, anticipation was growing. The LMS had only one place offering suitable conditions for a test run. This was between Whitmore Summit and Crewe, a distance of only 10.5 miles. Whitmore was breasted at 85. Speed steadily increased, so much that in 8.5 miles the loco was perilously close to Crewe and still accelerating. It had, the LMS claimed, achieved 114 miles per hour. The brakes were slammed on, and by the grace of God, the train managed to stay upright as it hit the first of the crossovers outside Crewe Station at 57 miles per hour. Incidentally, 3 highly respected timing observers, including Cecil J. Allen, all claim a maximum top speed of 113 miles per hour. The LMS's speed had been taken off the engine recorder on the footplate, not the most accurate of devices. As we watch Coronation an hour or so before this fascinating sequence of events, it's interesting to note that the planes chasing the special struggled to keep up during this dash for speed. As a result, they managed to miss the main event of the day. We, like the aeroplanes, leave 6220 at Road, some 60 miles from Euston, which had been covered in a touch under 49 minutes. The total journey to Crewe took 2 hours 10 minutes. The return run set a new Crewe to Euston record with a start-to-stop time of exactly 1 hour 59 minutes.
From 1946, the 24 streamliners began to lose their distinctive casings, beginning with the city of Birmingham in April 1946. The last to lose its casing was the only BR streamliner, City of Lancaster. The Duchess of Hamilton, she lost her casing in November 1947. Let's go and have a closer look at the locomotive and see what changes the removing the casing reveals. When the streamline casing was removed, the ex-streamliners appeared with split footplates, as seen here on Duchess of Hamilton. The first of the new builds to be so fitted was 6253, City of St Albans, when she was outshopped in September 1946. Previously, the conventional coronations had been built with a continuous footplate. The line of the coronation running plate is somewhat marred by the jumble of assorted machinery, including the sandbox fillers and lubricators. The description marine stores springs to mind. When the casing was removed, it revealed a smoke box with the most ugly squashed top. The chamfered smoke boxes were progressively replaced with round smoke boxes as renewals became necessary from July 1952 onwards. The first to be corrected was City of Birmingham, and all have been replaced by June 1960, the last to be modified being 46246, City of Manchester. When first introduced, the conventional Pacifics did not have smoke deflectors. The problems with drifting smoke led to their fitting in 1945, the first to be fitted being the Duchess of Montrose. On the coronations, there were 2 sorts of deflectors. The first, these fitted up on Duchess of Hamilton, which finish at the level of the upper footplate. On the earlier coronations with a continuous footplate, there was an additional inner piece which went and filled in this area here. It was fitted with its own grab handle, which means that only the split footplate coronations have got this separate grab handle here. With the casings removed, they were able to modify the cab and include the large cab windows which had been fitted to the conventional Pacifics. The streamlining was also removed from the tenders. The extended high tender sides were cut back to give easy access for the water column hoses. The cowl across the front of the top of the coal space was removed to increase coal capacity. The balancing along the above the axle boxes was removed, as was the plating which covered the lightning holes. Up by the cab, Duchess of Hamilton still has this high tender sheeting. On some of the other locomotives cut down much lower, same level as the side of the cab.
We'll now take a look at the Pacifics out on the main line during their BR days. First stop is Euston, where City of Nottingham eases through the station throat to pick up its train. Despite the introduction of the first diesels during the late 1950s, the Pacific still served a number of destinations, principally in the northwest and on the North Wales coast. Some Anglo-Scottish services also still benefited from Stanier power. Camden Bank was a favourite haunt for the cameras. The start out of Euston was quite steep, with gradients of up to 1 in 70. However, City of Lancaster makes light work of the grade as it heads north. Camden Shed can be seen on the left. City of Lichfield is in charge of a much heavier train and therefore requires banking assistance from an English Electric Type 4. With only 1.5 miles to go, City of Salford coasts by with the Up Caledonian. Having negotiated the bank, City of Edinburgh cruises through Primrose Hill on the Down Caledonian. Hatch End is 13 miles from Euston, and City of Coventry is well into its stride as it heads north on a heavy 14-coach Euston to Glasgow express. Some 3 miles further north were the water troughs at Bushy. City of Stoke-on-Trent heads north. This loco holds the distinction of being the last steam loco to carry the Royal Scot headboard when, on the 8th of September 1963, it deputised for a failed diesel on the Up service. The troughs at Bushy were one of 11 sets to be found between Euston and Glasgow. As a result, Stanier felt he didn't need to increase the water capacity of his tenders above 4,000 gallons. Down on the trackside, City of Coventry replenishes its tender as it heads northbound. Water was gathered by the use of a water scoop fitted to the underside of the tender, which was controlled by the fireman in the cab. We'll now spend some time watching the locos at Watford Junction. City of Hereford rushes north. City of Leeds also heads north. Note the leaking cylinder drain cock, which would cause about a 10% decrease in the locomotive's effectiveness and add an extra 10% on coal and water consumption. Next up is Duchess of Gloucester. The loco ran over 1.7 million miles during its service life, probably the most achieved by a member of the class. Sadly, mileage records were not kept for all the locomotives during the later years, and therefore one cannot be completely sure. In terms of steam locomotives, the Duchesses were used quite intensively. It was not uncommon for an individual loco to work from Euston to Liverpool and return in a single day. This was a round trip of 387 miles. The class was also used throughout on some Anglo-Scottish expresses. With diversions, this could be a run of some 414 miles, and some ran non-stop between Euston and Carlisle. At 67,000 miles per annum, the Duchesses were achieving an average of 7,000 miles per year more than any other steam locomotive. We now move on to Dodswell to see City of London head by on a Euston-Liverpool train. At Hill Morton, the northbound West Coast main line converges with the line from Northampton. City of Bristol is bound for Euston via the Northampton Loop. City of London charges north on a direct route. This locomotive has the distinction of being the first to be repainted into the BR Red livery. Duchess of Abercorn approaches the junction with a train from Northampton. At least 13 different livery variations were carried by the coronations. The streamliners appeared in blue, red, and wartime black. When de-streamlined, they joined their classmates in one of 3 LMS liveries. During BR days, 2 versions of blue, green, and red were tried as well as black. Towards the end of their careers, from the late 1950s, 2 liveries predominated. 16 locos were painted red, with the rest in green. Incidentally, the only streamliner to carry all 3 LMS streamlined liveries was Queen Elizabeth. Duchess of Atholl is in charge of the Up Red Rose and has probably been checked at Tamworth. Note the multiple unit on the railway overbridge. The Red Rose ran between Liverpool and Euston and was a typical coronation duty. The time allowed between Crewe and Euston for the 13-coach train was 2 hours 45 minutes, excluding unexpected stops. Right away, and Duchess of Atholl eases the train south. City of Edinburgh charges through on a down Anglo-Scottish service. Here's a quick glimpse of City of Bradford taking a breather during a test run. Because of their early withdrawal, footage of princesses is extremely rare. Here, Princess Helena Victoria runs light at Crewe. Crewe was often used as a loco changing point. City of Lancaster comes off its train to be replaced by an English Electric Type 4. This loco was the last to lose its streamlined casing in May 1949 and was the only streamliner to run in BR ownership. City of Leeds runs light through the station from its home shed at Crewe North. Meanwhile, Shedmate City of Stoke-on-Trent replaces an electric loco on a Manchester Piccadilly to Euston service. As the loco departs, keep an eye out for the gleaming 46248 in the background, waiting to take over a southbound freight. City of Leeds fireman prepares the loco for departure. A short while later, all his hard work is undone as the loco pulls out of Crewe with a freight bound for London.
The naming of the Staniers Pacifics lacks consistency. The service that the princesses were introduced to Hall was the Royal Scot, which had been introduced in 1927. At the time, the Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Scots Regiment, the Premier Regiment, was in fact the Princess Royal, and the LMS deemed it appropriate that the class leader would be called the Princess Royal. And the rest of the princesses, well, yes, they were all named after princesses, apart from three: 6210, Lady Patricia; 6211, Queen Maud, named after the Norwegian Queen; and 6212, the Duchess of Kent. The names were carried on attractive curved nameplates mounted above the centre splasher. However, for the streamlined coronations, the LMS reintroduced straight nameplates fitted to the side of the body casing, and this fitting was carried on with the conventional Pacifics. The coronations were so named as the first member of the class entered traffic during King George VI's coronation year, 1937. And the new streamlined service for which they had been built was called Coronation Scot. The LMS then continued the royal theme. The first five, all streamliners, were named: Coronation, Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mary, Princess Alice, Princess Alexandra. And the chromium-plated lettering was set off by a dark blue nameplate, matching the wheel centres. The next 10 Pacifics, 5 streamliners and 5 conventional locomotives were all named after duchesses, with chrome lettering on a black background. In 1938, Lord Stamp, who was president of the LMSR executive, saw streamlining as an important publicity asset, and he instructed that buildings should revert to streamliners. At the same time, reflecting the LMS's intercity marketing theme, the coronations were then named after cities, beginning with 6235, City of Birmingham. The penultimate Pacific, which was outshopped in 1947, number 6256, was named Sir William Stanier FRS. And the last of the Great Pacific, City of Salford, she was outshopped as a British Railways locomotive in Ivet Lime Black, initially numbered M6257, with the letter M appearing below the cabside number. Subsequently, following nationalisation, the class were renumbered with the prefix figure 4. Finally, the turbomotive 46202 had been rebuilt as a conventional Pacific, and she was outshopped as Princess Anne in August 1952. Sadly, a few weeks later she was wrecked in a Harrow crash on October the 8th.
During their careers, Staniers Pacifics were allocated to depots all along the West Coast main line. Willesden only ever played host to 2 Princesses during 1961 and 3 Coronations, which arrived following the closure of Camden in September 1963. However, other locos visited the North London depot for servicing, including Sir William Stanier FRS. This was one of the 2 locos fitted with roller-bearing rear trucks and the cutback cabside. The last member of the class, City of Salford, was the other loco so fitted. In January 1957, both Camden and Crewe North had 15 Pacifics on their books. By December 1959, Crewe had increased its allocation by 2, whereas Camden's fleet was declining. By December 1961, the Princesses were beginning to be withdrawn. December 1963 saw all the Princesses gone, plus 16 Coronations. A year later, there were none. City of Liverpool is being turned round at the Eastern Region's Perth shed. Camden was heavily associated with the locomotives. City of Edinburgh receives an oil top-up whilst awaiting its next duty on the Caledonian. Princess Arthur of Connaught, the loco we saw being built, remains largely unchanged, but now has a domed boiler and top feed. City of Salford is seen after hauling the up Caledonian. As the Pacifics are moved around the yard, we'll go back to enjoy some more line-side action north of Crewe. King George VI approaches on a North Wales Coast Express. Incidentally, this loco had carried the City of Leeds name for its first 9 months in traffic. It's also believed that this was the only coronation, apart from 6220, to achieve 100 miles per hour. On the 5th of September 1957, the loco ran from Crewe to Euston in 1 hour 58 minutes, and observers believe that the magical 3-figure mark was most probably achieved. Appearances on the North Wales coast became more regular as the class was displaced from the top link expresses. Back on the West Coast main line, an unidentified Pacific heads north. Heading towards the Fells, City of Bristol charges through Garstang. During 1956, this loco spent a loan period on the Western region to take part in trials. Bay Horse is located between Garstang and Lancaster. Note the wonderful set of coaches being used on this Anglo-Scottish express. We mentioned earlier the mileage achieved by Duchess of Gloucester. That accumulated by the complete fleet of coronations was over 58 million. As records were not kept for all locos during the final years, it is possible that the class did achieve a grand total of over 60 million miles. The climb to Grey Rig saw the line climbing at an average of 1 in 140 for 13 miles on a tortuous, twisting section of track. Heavier trains picked up a banker at Carnforth to help them clear the summit. City of Leeds benefits from the assistance of a Fowler 264 tank on a massive 16-coach train at Docker. City of Coventry makes the climb unassisted. Many engine men thought this bank was actually harder to negotiate than Shap. Running downhill through the Loon Gorge at Lowgill, the crew on board this coronation can take a breather. The level section of track at Dillicar was used for more water troughs. City of Carlisle quenches its thirst. The yellow diagonal stripe on the cab side denotes the loco is banned from working under the overhead wires south of Crewe. The water tanks are replenished after this southbound train has tackled Shap on a Carlisle to Preston stopper. City of Carlisle slows for its stop at Tibet with another local southbound service. After a short stop, the loco heads for Liverpool. The cameraman had just had a footplate ride and managed to set up his camera for Duchess of Sutherland's departure south from Tibet. Duchess of Rutland charges north at Loups Fell. It's interesting to note that despite being worked so hard, the coronations achieved on average 100,000 miles between overhauls. Princess Beatrice hurries downgrade with the Up Caledonian. When this service was introduced in 1957, the Midland also reverted to using a single loco throughout between Euston and Glasgow. Also at this time, the Royal Scot and Midday Scot reverted to single loco working. Duchess of Rutland again, tackling the climb at Scout Green, one of the most popular vantage points on the run up to Shap Summit. This loco was the subject of an article by O.S. Nock entitled Red Duchess to the Rescue. Having rescued a failed Type 4 diesel, the loco took over for a run between Crewe and Carlisle. The author claimed it was his best ever run behind a coronation. And incredibly, this event took place during their final year of service. City of Chester heads north a mere 2 miles from Shap Summit. The power of the coronations was highlighted on a special test run on the 26th of February 1939. Duchess of Abercorn was used on a 600-ton train from Crewe to Glasgow. After a 2-hour turnaround, The train returned south, and whilst climbing the gradient between Symington and Beatuck, the loco achieved a calculated 3,333 horsepower, an all-time British Pacific record. Later on, during the same run between Carlisle and Plumpton, a record 2,511 draw-bar horsepower was achieved. However, it was virtually impossible for this kind of power output to be maintained for anything more than short distances, as the firemen would not be able to shovel coal into the firebox quickly enough. 16 years later, Duchess of Gloucester was tested on the stationary testing plant at Rugby and achieved a continuous steaming rate in excess of 40,000 pounds per hour, yet another record. Nearing the summit, Princess Helena Victoria is silhouetted against the skyline as it slogs up the 1 in 75 climb with the relief service for Glasgow. Queen Mary is also seen at Shap Wells. Note the two articulated twin sets at the front of the train. Force 6 treble 2 is followed by Duchess of Gloucester. City of Leeds heads the down so-called horse and carriage parcels train at Shap. Coronation Princess Alexandra blasts south through Shap Station. During the 1940s, this locomotive had the misfortune to suffer 2 boiler explosions. The first in 1940, the second during 1948. Note the milk tanks on the rear of the train. We close this section with City of Hereford at full cry climbing on the northern approaches to Shap Summit.
Let's go and see some Staniers Pacific power in action and join Brel Hewitt on the footplate of Princess Margaret Rose.
Here we are on the footplate of Princess Margaret Rose. This is the business end of operations. I'm sat in the driver's seat, and when I get on this locomotive I often think of the famous names that have sat right where I am now. Driver Fred Bishop, the LMS driver who took the Princess Coronation to the United States, driver Laurie Earle, another famous LMS man. Sitting here, you look along the length of the boiler and you think, by goodness me, this is a long boiler. It really is a massive locomotive in size. The controls are very much the same as any other locomotive. 2 very major components are the handle that makes it go, which is the regulator here. You lift that up and we allow steam to get into the cylinders, and the brake, which makes it stop. So the 2 most important items. But going around the other items here, left to right, we have the speedometer for obvious speed, the vacuum gauge showing the inches of vacuum that is available that control the brake. This is an attachment, again, fitted inside the braking system, which is automatic train control, and this will apply the brakes if a driver runs past a signal at danger or at caution without acknowledging what he's doing. These are handles which create the brake and pull the brakes off. Vacuum ejector, the small ejector and the large ejector. This is the handle for the cut-off on the locomotive, which is rather like a fluid clutch, for want of a better term, which regulates and cuts off the amount of steam that moves into the cylinder at any one cycle of the engine on a particular cylinder. And this makes the locomotive more economical and attains higher speed and gets more from the amount of fuel that is applied into the firebox. Moving across now, these are the gauges which show the level of water, and at the moment this one is shut off, so I'll just lift that back up. At the moment we have a full glass of water. The level is there, so it's just about right now as we're stood without moving and going to be for a few minutes. So we'll turn it back off again. We have two of those, such that if one were to fail, the other one can still keep the locomotive in operation. If both fail, the locomotive has to be stopped until a repair is effected. These are the handles which operate steam, allow steam to go down to the injectors, which in turn put water into the boiler to maintain the water levels on the boiler. This big casting above here, and this is the manifold, to which steam is taken out of the boiler and then sent to the various controls throughout the cab. A little bit not unlike a car manifold, except that this is taking steam rather than getting rid of exhaust steam. The two gauges across on the right-hand side here, this is the pressure gauge which shows the boiler pressure, and this one here is for steam heating of the carriages on cold days in winter to keep passengers nice and warm. This tells us how much steam that we're passing down the train. This is where all the hard work is done, through this firehole door, and between Euston and Glasgow on a non-stop run, a fireman would pass 10 tonnes of coal through there from the tender into the firebox in 6.5 to 7 hours. And in those days they were very fit young men. To do that while you're on the move in a shift, you certainly have to be extremely physically fit. So that's really the controls of the locomotive.
Towards the end of their careers, Staniers Pacifics were gradually displaced from the glamour of the expresses. They began to find work on secondary passenger services, freight and parcels. Here, Duchess of Rutland is seen at Llandudno Junction, having worked a local service from Crewe. The first coronations were withdrawn during 1962, when 3 locos were condemned. The following year saw a further 13 locos sent to the scrap heap, and the rest followed during 1964, 2 during February, 1 in March, 18 in September, and the last, Sir William Stanier, FRS, in October. 46228 was one of the last to go, retiring in September 1964. Not surprisingly, they were in demand for rail tours. City of Hereford has replaced LNER A4 Golden Eagle at Carlisle on the Three Summits Rail Tour during June 1963 for a run north over Beatuck. The loco seen after arrival at Carstairs, where it was replaced by Caledonian 060 57581 and Highland Jones goods number 103 for the run to Auchinloch. Princess Elizabeth comes off the two-day Aberdeen Flyer tour at Carlisle on the 3rd of June 1962 to be replaced by the Princess Royal. The tour had run north via the East Coast Main Line on the 2nd of June using A4s, and the return via the West Coast utilised the original Princesses. At Watford Junction, there was time for a quick photo stop before the final leg of the journey into Euston. Sir William Stanier FRS was put in charge of the RCTS's Scottish Lowlander on the 26th of September 1964. The train arrives at Preston. At Carlisle, 46256 was replaced by the highly appropriate A4 Sir Nigel Resley. Another RCTS tour was the East Midlander, which ran on the 9th of May 1964 and took City of Nottingham onto the Western region. The loco's only previous visit to Nottingham was for its naming ceremony, when unfortunately the loco became derailed at the Lincoln end of Nottingham Midland Station. This tour started at Nottingham Victoria and ran via the Great Central. Here the train approaches Leicester. At Woodford Halse, there was an opportunity for a photo stop prior to heading south. The tour is next seen amongst the Great Western semaphores at Banbury. At Didcot, 46251 was replaced by Bullet Pacific 34038, Linton. City of Nottingham then proceeded light to Swindon before returning the tour north later in the day. Another off-region tour saw City of London working a King's Cross to Doncaster special in 1963. Here the loco is seen making its way to King's Cross at Haringey. The only other visit by a Coronation to King's Cross was by City of Bradford during the 1948 loco exchanges. The loco was also used on the western and southern regions during the trials. Having just passed through Gasworks Tunnel, the tour heads past Belle Isle on the climb north and then disappears into Copenhagen Tunnel. While the rail tour passengers visited Doncaster Works, 46245 ran to Doncaster Shed for servicing. Having retrieved the empty stock, the loco pulls into Doncaster. Just after 4:30, the tour departs south. First, we see it passing Doncaster Decoy Yard. And then heading through Stevenage. Back at King's Cross, the loco departs for the Midland after a highly successful outing. More mundane work now, and an unidentified loco slogs up Shap with the mixed goods. The northbound horse and carriage is seen at Tibet. Another parcels duty is seen at Farrington behind Sir William Stanier, FRS. Whilst at Bletchley, City of Leeds performs the tedious task of removing a single van from its train bound for London. Shunting complete, 46248 continues its journey. City of Lichfield trundles through Dudswell with a mixed freight. Note the newly erected masts for the electrification scheme. City of Birmingham has charge of the Carlisle to Broad Street milk. Up in Scotland, at Stirling, the Princess Royal prepares to take out the Up Aberdeen fish train. The princesses were withdrawn before the coronations, and between early 1961 and the final withdrawal in November 1962, they flitted in and out of store. 5 were officially withdrawn during 1961, 1 in September 62, 4 the following month, and 46200 was the last to survive, being withdrawn in November. Our final shot sees an unlikely pairing, King George VI, minus plates, and a B1 run light to Perth shed.
As we said earlier, a total of 5 Staniers Pacifics have been saved for preservation. Well, we've seen Duchess of Hamilton, and we've seen Princess Margaret Rose. Let's go and find some of the others.
In recent years, the cost of moving locomotives by rail has been far higher than by road. This, and the fact that Bressingham is not rail connected, meant that 6233 Duchess of Sutherland was moved to its new home at Butterley by road. The difficult task of unloading the locomotive at Swanwick is seen taking place during February 1996. Back on the rails, the loco is moved cautiously to its new home. This means that only City of Birmingham at the Museum of Science and Industry in its home city is the last of the preserved Pacifics to remain landlocked.
Now owned by the Princess Royal Class Trust, is 6233 Duchess of Sutherland. This is one of the batch of 10 Pacifics which was outshopped as a conventional 462 in 1938 without the streamlined casing. And the main distinguishing feature of this particular batch is, of course, the continuous footplate at the front. When she finished her BR service, she was bought by Butlins and spent some 10 years as an attraction at the holiday camp at Ayr. She was then acquired by Alan Bloom down at Bressingham, and now she is in with her new owners here at Swanwick. And here is 6201 Princess Elizabeth, or at least what is still at Swanwick, while the rest of the locomotive has been sent to the 4 corners of the country as part of a major general overhaul to bring her back up to full standard for mainline running.
For years, the only preserved Staniers Pacific out on the main line was the National Railway Museum's Duchess of Hamilton. The Duchess had been restored to steam in 1980 for the Rainhill celebrations and is seen 5 years later approaching Ardley Tunnel with a Marylebone to Stratford-upon-Avon special. Princess Elizabeth, owned by the Princess Elizabeth Society, was the next to venture back onto the main line. In May 1990, Princess Margaret Rose returned. Its first public run was the Richard Levick Memorial Special on the 2nd of June between Derby and Sheffield. The loco had originally been saved by Butlins and moved to their Pwllheli holiday camp in May 1963. 12 years later, it was loaned to the Midland Railway Trust and moved to Butterley. Then in October 1988, Brell Ewart bought the loco from Butlins. A month later, Duchess of Hambleton was out on Settle and Carlisle duties and is seen departing Skipton. This loco was also owned by Butlins and had been exhibited at Minehead until being passed over to the National Railway Museum in 1975. The Settle and Carlisle has been a popular haunt for the preserved Pacifics. 46229 has charge of a northbound Cumbrian Mountain Express on one of the hardest sections on the climb to Ace Gill. The following year, on the 17th of June 1991, Princess Elizabeth has charge of the Red Rose at Hellifield. A week later, Princess Margaret Rose made its first southbound trip on the Cumbrian Mountain Express. At the time, the northbound CMEs were steam-hauled as far as Appleby. Its duties complete, the Duchess, with leaking cylinder drain cock and its support coach in tow, heads for Carlisle during February '92. Princess Elizabeth, adorned with a Caledonian headboard, heads a northbound CME on the 4th of July 1992. Note the burnished wheel rims. On the 5th of August 1992, Princess Margaret Rose worked the CME all the way to Carlisle. The following April, 6201 was still out and about on the S&C, this time carrying the midday Scott headboard while working a southbound Cumbrian Mountain Express. Ten days later, the loco was working along the North Wales coast as part of the LMS Pacific Rail Tour. 46229 and 46203 were also used on the tour. The latter is seen returning the train to Crewe. In June of 1993, Princess Margaret Rose was back on the S&C. This was the location of Crosby Garrett Station, which once boasted 13 staff working a 3-shift rota. Today, all that remains is weeds. The privatization of BR led to the Intercity Sunset Tour on the 3rd of April 1994. One loco from each of the big four plus a BR standard were used. The LMS were represented by Princess Margaret Rose. December 1994 saw Duchess of Hamilton make a run from York to Didcot. This loco has certainly had an eventful life. When new in 1939, it was disguised as 6220 Coronation and sent to represent Britain at the New York World Fair. During its tour, it clocked up some 3,000 miles over the American network. Meanwhile, the real 6220 masqueraded as 6229. Because of the Second World War, the loco didn't return from the USA until 1943, when names and numbers were restored to their rightful owners. On the 21st of January 1995, 46203 carried the Royal Scot headboard for its southbound CME run. By now, safety regulations had insisted on the fitting of a quartz halogen headlamp. Two months later, the snow had arrived to present this very pleasing study of Princess Margaret Rose at Askill. We close with Duchess of Hamilton at full bore on its return to Shap during 1995. For the first time in over 30 years, a coronation had finally returned to this classic location. The fact that Staniers Pacifics are still found running on the main line some 60 years after they were built is a credit to Sir William. If he were alive today, he would no doubt be wearing that famous smile.
.46229 Duchess of Hamilton enjoyed a busy and varied mainline career up until its boiler certificate expired in 1996. However, its place has now been taken by a second Duchess in the form of 6233. On a fine and crisp December morning, the Pacific made a barnstorming departure from Euston. The previous time a Duchess climbed Camden Bank was in November 1996, when 46229 worked a day-out charter to Glasgow. The Loco's mainline career in preservation had started in July. In October, she worked 2 tours between Crewe and Holyhead, organised by her owners, the Princess Royal Locomotive Trust. After turning at Valley, the train heads back across the Isle of Anglesey, en route for Crewe. On the 8th of December, the Loco made the first of 2 memorable trips, both in ideal winter conditions. Pastime Rail's the Midlander was steam hauled from Derby to St Pancras. It was to travel via Melton Mowbray and then head south along the normally freight-only route to Kettering. The highlight was the crossing of the magnificent Haringworth Viaduct. A water stop was made at Kettering. The Loco has an interesting history. It had been bought by Sir Billy Butlin on withdrawal, and from 1964 to 1971 had been on display at his holiday camp at Ayr. It was then moved to Bressingham in Norfolk, where, after some overhaul work, it was allowed limited operations. Then, in 1996, it was sold to the Princess Royal Locomotive Trust. Money from the owners and the lottery allowed a complete overhaul. The loco had been rededicated at a special ceremony at Butterley on September the 6th. Today it's running in Crimson Lake passenger livery. Later, 6233 restarts the journey down the Midland Main Line, destination St Pancras. A week later, the Duchess returned north from the capital, this time via Didcot and Oxford. Here it works down the Western Main Line through Twyford. The train made easy work of Hatton Bank. With safety valves blowing, it's around a mile from the summit.